The morning after the rain, the house felt hollow. Not quiet in a peaceful way, but quiet like it was waiting for something that would never come back. The kind of quiet that made every small sound too loud. The refrigerator hummed. The clock clicked. The floor creaked under careful steps. David Walker sat at the kitchen table, shoulders bent, hands wrapped around a mug he had already forgotten to drink from. The coffee had gone cold. He did not notice. His eyes were fixed on the window, on the gray sky outside, as if he were hoping it might explain how the world could keep moving when his had stopped. Sarah had been gone for 3 months. 3 months was long enough for people to stop asking how he was doing. Long enough for cards to stop arriving. Long enough for the food in the freezer to be eaten or thrown away. But it was not long enough for the house to feel right again. Emily watched him from the doorway. She had come home after college to help. Or at least that was what she told her friends. The truth was, she did not trust the house alone with him yet. Her father had always been strong, steady, kind of man who fixed things without being asked and showed up early to everything. Now he moved like he was afraid of breaking something invisible. Emily took a slow breath and stepped into the kitchen. "Morning, Dad," she said. David turned his head as if surprised to see her. A small smile appeared, practiced and tired. "Morning, Em." She poured herself a glass of water and leaned against the counter. She watched the way his hand shook just a little when he lifted the mug. She noticed how he did not mention the weather anymore, or the news, or anything that once filled the space between words. After Mom died, silence had become a third person. At the table, Emily had been holding something inside her for weeks. It was not anger. It was not sadness. It was fear mixed with love, and it pressed on her chest every time she saw her father stare at nothing. She crossed the room and stood beside him. "Dad," she said again, softer this time. "Yes." He looked up at her face, really looked, as if measuring her mood. She placed her hand on the back of his chair. Her heart beat fast. She felt like she was standing at the edge of something she could not undo. "You don't have to sit here like this every day," she said. "You don't have to stop living." David's jaw tightened. His eyes dropped to the table. "I'm fine," he said too quickly. Emily leaned closer. Her voice lowered, not because she was afraid someone would hear, but because the words felt fragile, like glass. "It's okay if you choose to live again," she whispered. The sentence hung between them. David froze. For a long moment, he did not move. His breathing slowed, then stopped, then started again in a sharp pull of air. His eyes filled, not with tears, but with shock, as if the idea had never been allowed to exist before. He did not answer. Emily straightened, suddenly unsure. She had not meant to hurt him. She had not meant to push. She had only wanted to open a door. "I didn't mean," she started. David raised his hand slightly, stopping her. His voice was rough. "No, it's okay." He stared at the table again, but his face had changed. Something had cracked open, something that had been sealed tight since the hospital room. Since the long night when he held Sarah's hand and promised things he could no longer keep, Emily stepped back. She nodded once and left the kitchen, her chest tight, her eyes burning. She did not know if the whisper would help or haunt him. The rest of the day moved fast but felt slow. David went through motions. He showered, he dressed, he drove to the grocery store even though he did not need much. He walked the aisles with a blank list, picking up items out of habit. Sarah used to plan meals he used to follow. At the checkout, the clerk asked how his day was going. Said good because that was the word people expected. On the drive home, Emily's words replayed in his mind. "It's okay if you choose to live again." The idea made his chest ache. It felt wrong. It felt disloyal. It felt dangerous. That evening, the house darkened early. David did not turn on the lights right away. He stood in the living room, hands in his pockets, staring at the bookshelf. Sarah's favorite novels still stood in order. He had not touched them. Touching them felt like erasing her fingerprints. He sat down slowly on the couch. Across the room was a small wooden cabinet. He had avoided it since the funeral. Inside were things that did not belong to the present. Old photos, old letters. Pieces of a life that felt closed. David stood again before he could talk himself out of it. The cabinet door creaked as he opened it. He crouched and reached inside, pulling out a thin box. Dust covered the lid. He wiped it away with his sleeve and opened it. Inside were letters, tied with a faded ribbon, not from Sarah, from friends, from family, from another time. At the bottom was a folded piece of paper, worn soft at the edges. He recognized the handwriting immediately. Claire. The name sent a quiet shock through him. Claire Bennett had been part of their lives for years. She had met Sarah at work. They became friends fast. Okay? She was warm, honest, the kind of person who listened more than she spoke. Over time, she had become someone David trusted too. They shared. Long talks over coffee, jokes at gatherings, quiet understanding. When Sarah got sick, Claire was there. When Sarah passed, Claire stepped back. David unfolded the letter with careful hands. It was old, from before the illness, from a time when life felt simple. The words were kind, thoughtful, nothing improper. Just friendship. Just care. But reading it now after the whisper, the words felt heavier. He folded the letter again and sat back on his heels. Emily's voice echoed in his head. You don't have to disappear with her. David closed his eyes. Later that night, Emily sat on her bed, scrolling on her phone, pretending not to listen. To the house, she heard footsteps downstairs, drawers opening. A long pause. She wondered what her father was doing. She wondered if she had made things worse. Downstairs, David sat at the dining table with his phone in his hand. The screen glowed in the dark room. He had not spoken to Claire in weeks. After the funeral, she had sent messages. He had replied politely, briefly, then nothing. Silence. Felt safer. His thumb hovered over the screen. He typed. Deleted. Typed again. Finally, he wrote a simple sentence. I hope you're well. I've been thinking about you. He stared at it for a long time. Then he pressed send. The message left his phone, and with it something else left his chest. A small release. A breath. He had not realized he was holding. David set the phone down and leaned back in his chair. He did not expect a reply that night. He did not even know what he hoped for. Minutes passed. Then the phone buzzed. He froze. Slowly, he picked it up. I've been thinking about you too. David closed his eyes. Upstairs, Emily felt her phone vibrate with a message from a friend. She glanced at it, then set it aside. But she did not know that, at that exact moment, something had shifted downstairs. Something quiet but powerful. The house was still full of grief that had not changed. But for the first time since Sarah died, the future no longer felt completely sealed. And it all started with a whisper spoken in a quiet kitchen at dawn. David Walker did not sleep well that night. Every time he closed his eyes, Emily's words echoed in his mind. It's okay if you choose to live again. The sentence was simple, almost ordinary, but it had changed something in him he hadn't understood before. A weight he hadn't known he carried suddenly felt lighter, as if someone had whispered permission to breathe again. Morning came with muted sunlight. The house still felt heavy, but not as unbearable. David went through his routine, mechanically making coffee, checking emails, walking past the living room that still held traces of Sarib, but there was a difference. He carried a quiet expectation in his chest, a sense that maybe life had something waiting for him that wasn't tied to loss. He opened his phone. Claire's reply from last night was still there, glowing softly on the screen. I've been thinking about you too. It was a small thing, but it made his chest tighten and loosen at the same time. He stared at it for several minutes, unsure what to do next. Then, almost on instinct, he typed back, would you like to meet for coffee sometime? He pressed send before he could second-guess himself. The phone buzzed almost immediately. "I'd like that. Tomorrow." A part of David wanted to hesitate, wanted to step back and remind himself that he was still mourning, that he was still Sarah's husband. But another part, the part Emily had touched, pushed forward. This was not betrayal. This was permission. To feel, to live. The next day, David drove across the bridge into Vancouver. He had not been to that part of the city in years. The streets looked different, the shops brighter. He arrived early, as always, and sat at the small table by the window. In the cafe, the steam from his coffee curled into the air, carrying warmth he hadn't realized he needed. Claire arrived a few minutes later. She smiled the moment she saw him, that same warm smile that had always made him feel understood. It was easy to see the grief in her eyes. Too, the same grief that never really goes away, just softens over time. They spoke at first about ordinary things, the weather, small neighborhood changes, the cafe itself. The conversation was light, almost mundane, but it carried a weight of reassurance. They could talk, and it didn't hurt to do so after a while. Conversation turned toward Sarah. They shared memories, small anecdotes, the moments that made her laugh. The way she had always insisted on baking too much bread on Sundays. David realized he had been holding these memories close, almost afraid to release them into words. But Claire reminded him that sharing them didn't diminish them, only honored them. Over the following weeks, David and Claire fell into a rhythm. Of sorts. They met for coffee, for walks along the river, sometimes for dinner. Nothing rushed, nothing forced. Every conversation was careful, deliberate, as if both were testing the waters of a life that had shifted suddenly and quietly. Each meeting brought them closer, not in a way that erased Sarah, but in a way that allowed the heart to exist in. More than one space at a time. Back home, Emily noticed the change immediately. The house no longer felt heavy with the silence of mourning. There was movement now, little things. Her father humming a song, reading a book aloud in the living room, laughing softly when he remembered something from the day. It was subtle, but Emily felt a relief she hadn't expected. Her whisper, the one she thought might be foolish, had opened a door for him. One evening, Claire came to the house. It was quiet. Just after dinner, the soft light of the lamps casting shadows on the walls. Emily was upstairs, pretending to read, but really listening. She heard the door click softly and footsteps in the hallway. David greeted her in a way that was careful, warm, measured. It wasn't a greeting of urgency or desperation. It was a greeting of two people who had survived loss and were willing to see what might come next. They talked in the living room. Claire perched on the edge of the couch, David in his favorite chair. Conversation flowed easily. Laughter came softly. And for a moment, the house felt like it once had filled with life, with connection. Claire shared small stories from her days. David shared quiet memories of Sarah. They spoke of grief, of love, of how fragile it all could be. And in that sharing, a connection grew that was careful but undeniable. Later that evening, as Claire prepared to leave, David walked her to the door. The night outside was crisp, the stars bright against the sky. He hesitated, unsure what to say. "I don't want to hurt anyone," he said finally, voice low, almost a whisper. Claire's smile was gentle, understanding. "Neither do I," she said. "We can move slowly, no rush, no expectations." Her words were a balm. David realized he had been holding his own fears as tightly as he had held on to Sarah. Fear of moving forward. Fear of feeling joy again. But here, with Claire, he could breathe without guilt. He could smile without shame. Emily, listening from the stairs, felt her chest swell. She had only whispered a sentence to her father in a quiet kitchen months ago, and it had rippled into something she had never imagined. Love could return in gentle ways, not to replace the past, but to honor it by continuing. Days turned into weeks. The house grew warmer. The sound of laughter returned, soft but present. David and Claire spent more time together. Each meeting was deliberate, careful, yet their connection deepened. They went on long walks in the park, lingered over coffee, shared stories of childhood, of work, of grief. And gradually, they began to imagine a life that included both the memory of what was lost and the possibility of what could be. Emily saw it all unfold and understood something essential. Love did not mean forgetting. Love did not mean replacing. It meant opening the heart again, even when it felt risky. Her father's happiness did not erase her mother's memory, coexisted with it. It's delicate and strong at the same time. One quiet evening, after Claire had left, David knocked gently on Emily's door. As she looked up from her book, surprised. "I want you to know," he said, voice steady but soft, "what you said to me, it saved me." Emily smiled, tears gathering in the corners of her eyes. She realized how much power there was in a simple act of kindness, in a sentence spoken at the right moment. She had only whispered a few words, but they had changed the course of a life. David sat down on the edge of her bed, letting the moment settle. He did not need to explain more. Emily understood. He did not need to move too quickly. Life had returned at its own pace, and that was enough. In the quiet house that once felt broken, something new had begun. Not as a replacement for what was lost, not as a denial of grief, but as proof that the heart could open again. That love, when given permission, could grow in unexpected places, soft and steady, full of warmth. And in that moment, Emily understood fully. Sometimes all it takes is a whisper, a small act of courage, to change everything. David leaned back in the chair, smiling faintly, thinking of Claire, thinking of Emily, thinking of Sarah. The house was still full of memories, full of love, and for the first time in a long time, was also full of hope. He realized life could be both, a memory of what had been and a possibility of what could come next. And as he closed his eyes, he allowed himself to imagine the future gentle, patient, and open to love again. The whisper had started it. The future would carry it forward.